$1. For quarters, cold and dull, sat in the middle of a scarred mahogany desk. Usually, this desk saw stacks of illicit cash, high-stakes contracts, and the weight of loaded revolvers. But today, it held a single dollar, and the man sitting behind it, Viktor Thorne, felt a chill that 20 years in the underworld hadn't prepared him for. A 6-year-old boy named Leo stood on his tiptoes to reach the desk's edge. His oversized hoodie was stained with grease, and his shoes were held together by duct tape. Victor's guards had their hands on their holsters, ready to toss the intruder out, but Viktor raised a single finger. The room went dead silent. "Is that enough for a sandwich?" Leo asked, his voice cracking like dry parchment. The man outside said, "You're the king of this street. Kings help people, right?" Viktor didn't look at the money. He looked at the boy's neck. Hanging from a dirty string was a silver signet ring with a chipped emerald. Viktor's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew that ring. He had seen it slide off the finger of his brother, Marcus, the night the docks went up in flames 10 years ago. Marcus had died so Viktor could run. Marcus had a son he'd never seen. "Who gave you that ring, kid?" Viktor's voice was a low growl, stripped of its usual iron. Leo's eyes welled up. "My dad. He said if the world ever got too dark, I should find the man who wears the match." Before we continue, if you're gripped by this mystery, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the moment Viktor settles the score. Now, let's get back to the darkness Viktor found when he followed Leo to the basement. Viktor didn't just buy a sandwich. He called for a feast. But as Leo ate, Viktor noticed the boy wouldn't sit back in the chair. Every time the door creaked, Leo flinched. "Where is your dad, Leo?" Viktor asked softly. Leo looked at his $1 on the desk. "He's in the quiet place." Mr. Miller. Leo didn't just bring interest, he brought a question. "Uncle Viktor, why does everyone jump when you walk into a room?" The boy's eyes, once clouded by hunger, were now sharp with a curiosity that mirrored his father's. Viktor's hand stilled over the dollar bill. He had kept his world of shadows hidden behind a curtain of expensive suits and legitimate storefronts, but the curtain was fraying. Mr. Miller, though broken, had friends. The syndicate didn't appreciate their collection agent being turned into a ghost. "Power is a heavy coat, Leo," Viktor replied, his voice a low rumble. "Once you put it on, you can never take it off." The moment was shattered by the sound of the office's reinforced glass spiderwebbing. A high-velocity round whizzed past Leo's ear, embedding itself in the mahogany desk. Jonas was moving before the sound echoed, throwing his body over the boy and dragging him behind the heavy oak. Viktor didn't flinch. He didn't duck. He simply reached into the drawer and pulled out the match to Marcus's green ring. "Jonas, take the boy to the safe room. Tell the men, the peace treaty is over." The safe room was a cold, windowless box of reinforced steel hidden behind the library's false wall. Inside, the hum of the ventilation system was the only sound. Leo sat on a leather bench, his breath hitching. He still clutched the silver signet ring Viktor had given him back. "Jonas," Leo whispered, looking up at the man who stood like a stone gargoyle by the heavy door. "Who are those people? Why are they trying to hurt?" Jonas didn't look back. His eyes were fixed on the bank of monitors showing the perimeter of the estate. On the screens, black-clad figures were moving through the gardens like ink drops in water. "They aren't trying to hurt us, Leo," Jonas said, his voice devoid of emotion. "They're trying to remind your Uncle Viktor that he has something to lose." That was their first outside. The cold had fully settled over Viktor Thorne. He stood in the center of his shattered office, glass crunching beneath his Italian leather loafers. He didn't seek cover. He reached for the intercom on his desk. "Gentlemen," Viktor's voice rolled through the estate's external speakers, calm and terrifying. "You've scuffed my floor and frightened a child. In my world, that's a debt that can only be settled in red." He pulled a gold lighter from his pocket and sparked it. It wasn't a signal for help, it was a signal for the hunt. From the tree lean, 10 hidden turrets rose from the manicured lawn. The syndicate's mercenaries didn't even have time to scream before the garden became a kill zone. Viktor walked out of the French doors, stepping over the fallen. He headed straight for a black sedan idling at the gate. Inside sat Miller's superior, a man named Vane, his face pale behind the tinted glass. Viktor tapped the window with the barrel of his customized 1911. Vane rolled it down, his hands shaking as he held a detonator. "I have a bomb under the clinic, Thorne. One button and your brother Marcus is." Viktor leaned in, his shadow swallowing the smaller man. "Was moved 20 minutes ago. My men are currently dismantling your quiet places across the city. As for that detonator." Viktor reached in and snatched it from Vane's hand, crushing it in his palm. "It only works if you're alive to press it." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sirens of the city Viktor owned. He didn't fire. He simply turned his back. "Jonas, clean the garden. And buy Leo a new hoodie. Something that doesn't stain so easily." Viktor walked back to the safe room. When the steel door hissed open, Leo ran to him. Viktor knelt, his bloody hand tucked behind his back so the boy wouldn't see. "Is it over?" Leo asked. "For today," Viktor said, ruffling the boy's hair. "But remember what I told you. Kings help people. But first, they make sure the monsters are too afraid to." About the night of the air in the private wing of the St. Jude's Recovery Center smelled of lavender and expensive filtration, a stark contrast to the damp bleach of Miller's basement. Marcus Thorne lay propped against the pillows, his face a map of silver scars and broken capillaries. For 3 days, he had drifted in the gray space between sleep and waking. But today, his eyes were clear. Viktor sat in the corner, a glass of amber liquid untouched on the side table. He was watching a news report on mute, a gas explosion at a suburban laundromat. "The cleanup was complete. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Vic," Marcus rasped. His voice was thin, like wine through dead leaves. Viktor stood, the floorboards silent under his weight. "You're awake. I'll call the doctor." "No," Marcus gripped Viktor's sleeve with a hand that still shook. "The boy. Where is with Vera?" "Eating enough pancakes to sink a yacht," Viktor said, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "He's safe, Marcus." Eyes, but a tear traced a path through the scar tissue on his cheek. "It wasn't a debt, Vic. It was a setup. 10 years ago, the night of the docks. You think the syndicate blew that warehouse to kill you?" Viktor went still. That night had defined his life. He had seen the flames, heard the screams, and found Marcus's signet ring in the ash. He had spent a decade building an empire of iron specifically to burn the syndicate to the ground in revenge. "The syndicate didn't set the charge," Marcus whispered, his grip tightening. "I saw the man in the shadows before the blast. He wasn't wearing a syndicate patch. He was wearing the crest of the Thorne family council." The glass on the side table shattered as Viktor's hand constricted instinctively. The Thorne council, the elders of their own bloodline, the men who sat in high-backed chairs in the hills, sipping cognac while the younger brothers did the bleeding. "They wanted us both gone," Marcus continued, his breath coming in ragged hitches. "We were too loud, too ambitious. They wanted the empire, but they didn't want the brothers who built it. I didn't stay behind to save you, Vic. I stayed behind because I was shot in the back by our own uncle's enforcer." The cold that usually protected Viktor's mind evaporated, replaced by a white-hot rage that made the room feel small. He had been a loyal soldier to the council for 10 years, funneling them millions, thinking they were his only remaining kin. "They used me," Viktor realized, his voice a dangerous silk. "They used my grief to turn me into their most lethal weapon against the syndicate, and now you have Leo," Marcus said, his eyes wide with a new terror. "Viktor, the ring, the green emerald. It's not just an heirloom. The council uses the emeralds to track the lineage. As long as Leo has that ring, they know exactly where the last Thorne heir is." The door to the room creaked open. Leo stood there, holding a wilted daisy he'd picked from the garden. He looked from his father to his uncle, sensing the electricity in the air. "Uncle Viktor? Is Daddy okay?" Viktor looked at the boy, then at the ring hanging around his neck. He realized the bullet that shattered his office window hadn't been a syndicate warning. It had been a council hit. Viktor walked over and knelt in front of Leo. He didn't take the ring. Instead, he tucked it inside the boy's shirt. "Daddy is fine, Leo. But we're going on a trip," where, Viktor looked up at Marcus, an unspoken vow passing between the brothers. The king was no longer defending a street, he was going to war with the throne itself. "To the hills," Viktor said, his eyes turning to flint. "It's time to settle a debt with the Thorne estate." Sat atop Blackwood Crest like a stone vulture, overlooking the city it bled dry. It was a fortress of marble and ivy, guarded by men in tactical gear who lacked the scars of the street but carried the cold efficiency of corporate assassins. Viktor's convoy didn't arrive with sirens. 3 black SUVs drifted up the winding drive, headlights cut, moving through the fog like sharks. Inside the lead vehicle, Leo was asleep against Jonas's shoulder, a pair of noise-canceling headphones over his ears. Viktor looked at the boy one last time before stepping out into the biting mountain air. "Stay with him," Viktor ordered Jonas. "If I'm not out in 20 minutes. Level the house." Viktor walked toward the grand entrance. He didn't sneak. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply kicked the hand-carved oak doors open with a force that cracked the frame. The great hall was filled with the scent of aged tobacco and betrayal. 4 elderly men, the Council of Thorns, sat around a circular table of polished obsidian. At the head sat Uncle Silas, a man whose face, "Viktor," Silas said, not looking up from his glass of cognac. "You've always been prone to dramatic entrances. You should be at the docks, securing the syndicate's territory. Why are you here?" Viktor walked to the table and tossed the emerald signet ring onto the obsidian surface. It clattered with a hollow, metallic ring. "Marcus is alive, Silas. And he remembers the backstabbing coward who pulled the trigger 10 years ago." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. The other council members shifted, their eyes darting to the shadows where their enforcers waited. "Marcus was a liability," Silas said, his voice dropping the facade. "As are you. You were a magnificent hound. Viktor. You tore our enemies apart and brought the spoils to our feet. But a hound that finds its own leash is a dangerous thing." Silas snapped his fingers. 6 red dots appeared on Viktor's chest, centered over his heart. From the balcony above, snipers took aim. "Where is the boy, Viktor?" Silas leaned forward, his eyes hungry. "The true heir. Hand him over, and perhaps we'll let you live out your days in a cell. He is the future of this council. You are just the muscle we've outgrown." Viktor looked at the red dots, then back at his uncle. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face, the look of a man who had already burned the world down in his mind. "You think I came here to negotiate?" Viktor reached into his pocket and pulled out a small remote. "I didn't bring the boy to you, Silas. I brought the city to your doorstep." At that moment, the power to the estate cut out. The red dots vanished. From the valley below, the roar of 100 engines rose like a physical wave. It wasn't Viktor's men. It was the families of the quiet places, the people Viktor had freed, the shopkeepers he protected, and the street soldiers who owed their lives to Marcus. "You spent 10 years teaching me how to be a king," Viktor whispered, leaning over the table Silas's ear. "But you forgot the most important rule. A king is nothing without his people. And your people, they're currently storming your gates." Explosions rocked the foundation. The grand windows shattered as Viktor's private militia breached the walls. Silas scrambled for a hidden drawer, but Viktor's hand closed around his throat, lifting the elder off his feet. "For Marcus," Viktor growled. "For Leo." He didn't kill Silas. Death was too quick for a man who had stolen a decade. Instead, Viktor dragged him to the balcony. Below, the courtyard was flooded with light and the faces of those the Thorne Council had oppressed. "The throne is vacant," Viktor shouted, his voice echoing across the mountain. He walked back inside, leaving the broken council to the mercy of the crowd. He returned to the SUV, sliding into the seat beside a waking Leo. "Is the trip over, Uncle Viktor?" Leo asked, rubbing his eyes. Viktor looked back at the burning estate, then at the green ring sitting on the dashboard. He picked it up and handed it to the boy. The trip is over, Leo, Viktor said, his voice finally finding peace. We're going home. To your father. As the SUVs rolled down the mountain, the cold finally left Viktor Thorne. He wasn't a king anymore. He was just a brother. And for the first time in 10 years, he was a man who didn't have to look over his. The dust from the Blackwood Crest explosion had long settled, replaced by the clean, salt-tinged air of a private estate on the shores of Lake Michigan. This wasn't a fortress, it was a home. No obsidian desks, no hidden cameras in the birdhouses, just a wide porch and the sound of the tide. Marcus stood by the railing, his cane clicking rhythmically against the wood. He was thinner than before the fire, but his posture was straight. Beside him, Leo was trying to skip stones across the water. The boy had traded his duct-taped shoes for sturdy boots, and the haunted hollows beneath his eyes had filled with the light of a child who knew where his next meal was coming from. Viktor stepped onto the porch, carrying 2 coffees. He didn't wear a tailored suit today, just a simple sweater, though the 1911 still sat discreetly at his small of his back. Old habits were hard to kill, especially when you were the man who had dismantled a century of corruption in a single night. The council's assets have been liquidated, Viktor said, handing a cup to Marcus. The quiet places are being converted into community centers and low-income housing. The street tax is officially a ghost story. Marcus took a sip, looking out at his son. And the syndicate? They won't just let you walk away into the sunset. Viktor leaned against the railing, his gaze tracking a distant freighter. The syndicate knows that I have enough files on their offshore accounts to bury them for 3 lifetimes. We have a mutual understanding. I stay out of their business, and they stay very, very far away from mine. Leo suddenly cheered as a stone skipped 4 times before sinking. He ran up the porch steps, beaming. Did you see that, Uncle Viktor? I'm getting better. Viktor ruffled the boy's hair, his hand no longer shaking with the cold. You're getting dangerous, kid, Leo, Marcus said, reaching out to pull his son close. Go get your backpack. We have an appointment at the new school today. As the boy dashed inside, Marcus turned back to his brother. You did it, Vic. You kept the promise. I didn't do it alone, Viktor replied. It started with a kid who had $1 and a heart bigger than this whole city. He looked down at the mahogany table on the porch. Resting there, encased in a small glass paperweight, was the original, crumpled $1 bill Leo had placed on his desk. It was a reminder that even in a world built on blood and iron, the smallest act of bravery could topple a throne. Viktor Thorne was no longer the king of the streets. He was something much more powerful, a man who was loved.